as we always, the first part of Buddhist practice is always setting intentions, making aspirations. And we do that in this class by saying the four immeasurables. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings not be separated from the happiness that has never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. We're going to start this class with meditation. We'll review the basic technique that we use in this class since we've been away for a bit. And then Victoria has some reading she wants to do for you, and then we can do some Q&A. There's a Q&A function on the Zoom toolbar, so you can ask questions through that, which we'll get to in the latter part of the class. But to start with, usually we sit on the floor, cross-legged. We usually use a cushion. So I'll try to show you what I mean. So I use a cushion. Sometimes I use one or two. But really what you're trying to do is keep your hips either aligned or keep your knees above, your hips above your knees or aligned with your knees. You don't want your knees to be above the hips because that's going to put a lot of strain on your back. So the hips should be aligned or above the knees. And, you can do cross-legged, or some people like to do this with one leg up, half lotus, that's called. Cross-legged's fine. And the point is to be comfortable, if this is something that's new, sitting like this is new, the point is not to put a lot of strain on your body so you're uncomfortable and all you're thinking about is this physical discomfort. So try to get in a position of comfort. If you can't sit on a cushion or on the floor, you can use a chair. But the important thing if you do use a chair is to keep your back straight so you're not leaning back. And the same thing applies. You should have your feet on the ground, but the hips should be aligned or above the knees. So we're sitting cross-legged or we're sitting in the chair. The back is straight. The back is not like rigid and like military kind of attention, but it's straight but relaxed. The shoulders as well. We want a certain amount of alignment in the spine. We use that analogy of like a string on a guitar or something. If it's tuned too tight, it doesn't make a tone, and if it's tuned too loose, it doesn't make a tone, but with enough tension, it makes the proper tone. It's the same thing here. So you want it. It's also the same thing with our mind too. The mind, you're not focusing too intensely and and you're not spacing out there. It's this kind of relaxed, supple attentiveness. And the same thing in the body. It's a relaxed, kind of supple attention, energy that you're holding yourself with. The head, the chin should be kind of tilted a bit down, not up like this, a little bit down, right? Like I said, so your back is straight, your chin is tilted a little bit down. Your hands, you can rest, on your lap. Some people like to do this where they touch the ring finger to the thumb. You can have them down on your knees. You can have the left palm open and the right hand on top of it in the lap, thumbs touching. Again, whatever you're comfortable with there. The eyes in this class and in a lot of Tibetan Buddhist practice, meditate with the eyes open. And the gaze should kind of follow the bridge of your nose in a way. And again, the same analogy applies. We're not doing this really intense, laser-like focus. And we're not doing this kind of cross-eyed, out of focus thing. It's a relaxed gaze on, whatever's in front of you, and it doesn't really matter what's in front of you. Whatever it is, we're not getting into the story of what's in front of you. We're just relaxing our gaze on it. So from this posture is where we really begin. And the next thing we focus on is the breath, which we breathe through the nose, unless you can't, then you could breathe through your mouth. In the posture, take 3 breaths. We're not doing, again, if you see all the kind of instructions are this middle way. We're not doing this deep breath. We're not doing short, shallow breaths. We're doing a relaxed, even, comfortable breath. Let's do another 3 and just focus your attention. Keep everything, the posture, the gaze, the angle of the gaze, but focus your attention on where the breath moves in and out of the nostrils, where the nose meets the upper lip. Just focus your attention there for the next 3 breaths. And you can see just with that simple posture, breathing, we've already kind of calmed things down. We've calmed our body, and even not engaging with the mind yet, which we're not, just by doing what we just did, the mind kind of naturally settles a bit. Meditation, there's misconceptions about it, like it's about not thinking, having no thoughts, or that it's something that only certain people can do, but certain people are more naturally adept, to meditation. And none of that is true. It's not about having no thoughts. It's about working with the thoughts, because the mind thinks. It's working with the thoughts. And it's something that all of us can do. We all have busy minds. The ability to meditate has nothing to do with your attention span or lack of attention span either. That's another misconception. So, how do we work with our minds? We use 2 really basic techniques in this class. One is just this focusing on the breath, where the breath moves in and out of the nostrils. We use that as kind of an anchor. So let's do 3 breaths again, focusing on the air moving in and out. Let's do 5 actually. During those 5 breaths, you may have had a lot of different thoughts about this, about what we're doing, about how you can't do it, about how hard it is, about how you don't want to do it, about how you're not meant to do it, or your mind is too busy, or whatever. When a thought arises, the key to this whole practice is being aware of the fact that a thought has arisen. If you can become aware of the fact that a thought has arisen, then you can apply a technique The first one being going back to the breath, which means focus your attention again on the breath and where it moves in and out of the nostrils, and kind of repeat that formula over and over again during the session. So you're in your posture, you have your gaze, you're breathing, you're focusing on where the breath is moving, and I'm aware of a thought that has arisen that maybe people aren't understanding what I'm saying. Back to the breath. Those 3 words or 4 words can cut right through. Back to the breath. Focus your attention again on the air moving. But the only way I was able to apply that technique is being aware of the thought that has arisen. The second technique is the same thing. You're aware that you're sitting and you're breathing and you're in your posture and you're aware that a thought has arisen and you imagine it as a cloud that has arisen in the sky. The sky being the mind being this stainless, limitless, infinite, clear, calm, stainless space. And that is the true nature of your mind. The mind being your Buddha nature that we all have. As Garchen Rinpoche said, Buddha is not the name of a man, it is the name of mind. That's where your awakened nature is, ultimately, when we clear away all the junk, all the, habitual emotions and movements of the mind. So the same thing applies. You're in the posture and you're breathing. And a thought has arisen. You're thinking about where I have to be later. And I just imagine that thought like a cloud that has arisen in this spacious sky-like nature of my mind, and I watch it dissolve back into the sky, the mind from which it came, leaving no trace. It's of the mind, but it's not the mind, really. It disappears, and we're back to that clear, limitless, sky-like nature of mind. So those are the techniques. I've spoken enough. I'm going to leave you on your own for the next few minutes as we sit and meditate. If you have questions, we can ask them later. I may talk a little bit, but maybe I've said enough. If you feel you need to just shift your posture and settle back in, that's fine. You're not locked into this pose. Just shift and settle back in. Back to the breath. Back to the sky-like nature of mind. That calm, infinite, stainless peace. You may need to apply the techniques a lot, and that's fine. Okay. And there may have been times there where you were kind of lost in thought, and the thought you just got kind of stuck in it and followed the train of it or the chain of the thoughts, and one led to the other. And then that's okay, and it's not, we're not kind of counting how long or how many. It's just about becoming aware of the fact that you're thinking, settling back in to that calm, to that nature of mind, to that spaciousness. That's the technique, which is actually very simple, but it's not easy. Um, and that's basically what we practice. If you have questions about it, we'll get to them later. Just put them in the Q&A. But this is something that, if you're not familiar with it, it's something that really has to be done on a regular basis to make any kind of progress in it. When you start at something that might seem really difficult or new or uncomfortable or challenging, but like anything that takes an effort to learn, you know, over time it gets, you become more comfortable with it. Victoria has some teachings she'd like to share with you today, so.
Just in regard with what Michael was saying about meditation and its basis and technique, we have to always start with the view, and the view is that thoughts are the play of the mind's energy. Thoughts will arise in the space of the mind and will dissolve into the space of the mind. That's why it's good to just stare directly at the thought rather than think about its content and pursue it. It's like if you're, a thought of a cup arises, don't find yourself making tea 3 minutes later. Don't get hijacked by that thought. Just watch it. It's like a ripples on the water, on the surface of the water. It'll dissolve. If you just stare at its empty nature, the thought will dissolve and another one will arise, and that one will dissolve and be replaced by another one. So just learning how to abide with that is very, very important. And can you please read this quote? I don't have my glasses. This is also pertaining to meditation.
Focusing on the breath is another effective way to settle the mind. As mentioned above, the mind rides on the energy, winds, or breath. Therefore, if there is much turbulent breathing, there are many disturbing thoughts. If your breathing is relaxed, quiet, or held, so will be your mind.
So breathing is very, very important. The life source of our body, the breath. It's very, very important to reconnect with it all the time, to know your intrinsic state. When you have disturbed energy, which is when your breath becomes disturbed as well, your mind will always inevitably be disturbed. And it's kind of like a good countermeasure. Always check your breathing to connect with your mental state. Mental state is not, state of awareness is not specific thoughts. It's just to know the kind of general state of your awareness. Is the ocean calm? Is the ocean turbulent? That kind of a state. And also what's very, very important is to really experience your mind in meditation uh, in the nature of space. Uh, Mind should be space-like, infinite. It shouldn't be hooked by any one single thought. Uh, there should be this kind of a breadth to it, because that's really the nature of awareness. Our awareness becomes only limited by the thoughts and our attachment to the thoughts. And so always kind of keeping the awareness on the quality of the mind, the spaciousness of the mind. The difference between like the element of space that's dead uh, and awareness is that the space of awareness is luminous. So, it's always said that the quality of the mind has two characteristics. They're not separate characteristics, and that's emptiness and luminosity. Luminosity is the cognizant nature of the mind, because mind cognizes. There's that's why thoughts are always arising. It's just the nature of mind. There's no reason to push them away. Uh, so when we're meditating, or just in general, whatever activities that we participate on, we make sure we don't hold on to the thoughts very, very tightly and give them that substantial, concrete uh, appearance, semblance, but that we always remember that thoughts are just like cloud formations. The mind is like the sky, and the cloud formations are the thoughts. They arise and disperse back into the mind. Anyway, so that's just regarding meditation. And I wanted to touch on a very, very kind of simple but very um, big topic that we always, all of us, have to deal with. Mind is suffering and mind is happiness. And so, why do we have one as opposed to the other? It's mind that understands and knows how things truly are, including how we are, how others are, how phenomena in the world are. If we understand the nature of how appearances, things abide, how they arise and cease, when we understand uh, the nature of impermanence, because all things, that's why they're called appearances. All things that arise will always disintegrate and cease to become other things. Thoughts will become replaced by other thoughts. Uh, our condition today, we may be healthy, tomorrow we may be sick. We may live in a big house today, and then our job changes, we lose everything, and we have to move into a little tiny one room apartment, etc. It's the nature of relative existence, of all the things that are arisings of an interdependent arising nature, things that are composed of elements, circumstances, etc. They are all guided by, the master of all these arisings is impermanence and change. And so there is, Buddhists talk about several kinds of suffering. And one of the kinds of suffering is the suffering of change. The suffering of change is something that accompanies us every moment and in everything. That's why mind is happiness and mind is suffering. When we try to stabilize things, when we try to stabilize reality, which is continuous change, I mean, our body is continuous change. Our conceptual mind is continuous change. The circumstances around us are continuous change. When we are ignorant about the true nature of appearances, of the relative state of things. By relative, I mean things that are composed, like our bodies, like everything that surrounds us in the physical world. What is not composed is the nature of mind. That is kind of the counterpoint to it, the mind is like the space inside the jar, and the jar is the body. The body is more like a little sandcastle on the side, on the beach, on the shore, where the waves are coming, the waves of time are constantly coming and brushing against it, washing it away. This little bucket of sand, or the form that's made by the bucket of sand, our body, will revert to its elemental structure. So is every other kind of phenomena in this relative world. And when we don't understand that, when we live in a big house and we think we will always live in that big house, or we have a strong, healthy body and we think we will always have that strong, young body, the suffering becomes so much more intense because it is so intensified by the attachment, the desire to make something permanent, something which is a constant movement. Reality is constant movement. In fact, if our body was not constant movement, if the blood didn't circulate, if the cells did not refresh themselves, the old ones died and the new ones were created. Our muscles never sleep inside in the body. When we're asleep, groups of muscles are resting while groups of muscles are working. uh, Things are constant movement and change, and that is just reality. This reality, of course, brings about more cataclysmic changes, such as when we actually stand at the moment of death, when the body, when the vessel, the jar, uh, is now ready to, has exhausted its life force, and is, the elements are ready to revert to their initial nature. The earth element of the solidity goes to, disintegrates and becomes non-solid. The water evaporates, the fire evaporates, etc. For most people, it's a very, very difficult moment. It's a moment with which they struggle, and even before that moment arrives, the struggle already starts through fear. We are possessed and gripped by that fear. But what we fear is something that is utterly natural. It's like being afraid of gravity when we step out of, through the door. We are afraid of something that is just the law of physical universe, the change, the impermanence, the constant movement. The constant movement that supplies us life is also the movement that leads eventually to the entropy and, the moment of death. And for most people, it is a tremendous suffering, this true suffering of impermanence. We experience it in many ways through our lifetime. We experience it through loss of possessions, loss of health, loss of loved ones, and eventually loss of our own vessel. But why do we experience this as such intense suffering? Is because we are unprepared by not really thinking about the nature of how things really abide. From the moment something is born, it is moving toward a certain other state. And then again, from death, for Buddhists, death is not an end. I mean, death means a new beginning in another form. That's what wandering in samsara means. For ordinary beings, a moment of death is something inconceivably painful, and tremendous suffering arises as a result of anticipating it or facing it. But for yogis, for practitioners, actually, because they know impermanence being the nature of all things that arise, of all things of composite nature, all things of interdependent arising, when the causes and conditions weaken or begin to change, the composite things will fall apart. The elements will cease to hold that particular thing in that particular shape. My jar will fall apart at the end of my life, but the space that I thought that I encapsulate in that jar, my awareness, will simply be reunited with the space. The inner space is reunited with the outer space. And in fact, for yogis, there is a term for that in Buddhism. It's said that the child luminosity, our awareness of an individual, meets the mother luminosity, Dharmakaya, the nature of all things. The little spark of light meets the sun. And in fact, for yogis, life is like a rehearsal. And the moment of death, the process of death, is performance. It's the play. It's the night the play opens, and this is for what you trained for. This is the moment for which all your practice occurs for that moment. It is at that very moment that if we have awareness, and we, in the moment of death, when elements are disintegrating, we do not faint. We've trained for the child luminosity to meet the mother luminosity. We can think of our teacher. We can think of the deities, protectors. Our mind will find a place in the next life, that is much more auspicious. We can be born in Buddha realms. We can become liberated. So, as in everything, we can look at everything in two ways. In ignorance, when we have the eye of ignorance, looks out into the darkness of solitude, because we always feel so alone, and so we're so attached to our own body that we don't see all the little points of light of all the other beings. We are marked by that solitude because our ignorance pretends and makes us see only the darkness out there, where in fact the sky is lit up because there are countless awarenesses that make up this mother luminosity. Countless awarenesses, and that's what the yogi knows. There is no fear. If the yogi is fully liberated, they don't have to take on another physical rebirth in the body, which again will get sick, get old, disintegrate, etc., all the normal things that happen to relative phenomena. A yogi may be liberated, fully liberated, where there is no more return into the samsaric cycles, or at least be reborn in much more favorable circumstance. Be reborn where Dharma is taught all the time, where we don't have a lifestyle where we have to toil just to pay our rent, but maybe we have an auspicious birth where our life and surroundings allow us to practice more, to dedicate more time to Dharma, and have to spend less time to just provide for our family and for ourselves. So, the two ways of looking at everything: ignorance, which gives us all this intense suffering. Ignorance is identifying with the jar, with the body, desiring it to remain forever, which is kind of a crazy dream, because it's never happening. It's not static. It never will be. Reality is a continuous movement of things. That's why we can ripen from a seed to a fully blossomed awareness of enlightenment. Change, the movement, the ability to evolve, to develop, to change, to move, is what allows for this. And it's a blessing that we are not static, that we have that. That means also that if we did something wrong, we can correct it because of change and because of emptiness. We can move to make amends and, change ourselves, change those circumstances, evolve. So ignorance is this kind of very, very insular, painful state of this encapsulation that holds on to something that's impermanent, desires it to be permanent. It's like trying to, stop a train with your naked body. It's a crazy thing, and it's extremely, extremely painful. Whereas when we become aware of reality, of the nature of things on this relative level, we know and we prepare for this ultimate change, for this kind of, the final scene. And we can use that moment as a moment, an opportunity for liberation, as opposed to a moment of great and most intense suffering. It is also said that when we depart this world with very, very afflicted mind, with great deal of fear, with great deal of sorrow, with great deal of all these kinds of, afflicted mental states, they will mark us for the next lifetime. Whereas when we are leaving and we are aware that what is happening is absolutely natural, and that that moment can be a moment of liberation that we have trained for. Very different results can occur for us in the next lifetime or in the bardo. We may not need another lifetime. We may be liberated fully. So that is the eye of wisdom. We don't need to be afraid of impermanence, because what is there to be afraid of? It's the nature of all things. It's like gravity. Uh, it's ignorance that makes us be afraid. It's ignorance that wants it to be different. It's ignorance that wants it to stop, because that's just not something that's possible. So working against something impossible is just a huge waste of time and a huge suffering in and of itself. We can eliminate that suffering by simply becoming aware of how things exist in the world, how our bodies are exist in the world, how our situation is in the world, how others, our parents, our children, etc., others. We have to understand that we will experience change of condition, change of loss, and finally, an ultimate kind of change is the loss of our own life. But if we experience it with the eye of wisdom, and we're not swallowed up completely through attachment and ignorance, something very magical can happen for us. And that requires that we practice now, and we practice like hell. There is no time to waste, because if we do not habituate ourselves to knowing the nature of our mind, which is not this impermanent changing thing, you know, the little ripples on top of, the mental play of thoughts is not the nature of mind. It is also part of the nature of mind. It is the play of mind, but we really need to get to know our basic condition, our true nature of mind. And in the moment of death, that is the beacon of light, and that is the anchor. And that's just reality. We have to spend our life, and a great deal, most of it, I mean a great deal, we have to give to this practice of awareness and experiential learning of how it truly is. We can't, our concepts are not going to help us. The fact that we read books and we went to teachings, uh, intellectual information is not going to help us in the moment of when the elements are dissolving. And that's coming for all of us, of course. And I didn't mean this to be one of these macabre, conversations, but we are human beings, and that is an inevitable something that we must all face. It is a challenge for all of us. But again, as I said, for yogis, it's like who trained all their life. Moment of death is that moment where we can fly to liberation. And that can only happen when we have an experiential, many times over experience of knowing what the nature of the mind is. Then there is nothing to fear. Then we can be liberated. Then we know what to do in the moment when the mind is separating from the physical elements of the body. And it is very important to train.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. A lot of questions. Would you please describe model setting and intention for coping with loss or grief? When I say setting an intention, I'm talking really specific. Before we talk about grief or anything, we're really talking about whatever practice you're doing, be it meditation practice, if you're involved with a teacher and you have some kind of idam practice in Vajrayana, or you're doing Tonglen practice or something, you're setting an intention, making aspirations, is connecting to the view of Buddhism, like Victoria said. And the view of Buddhism really talks about interdependence, shunyata or emptiness, the fact that nothing exists inherently on its own from its own side, and basically that everything is connected as a oneness, that duality is a delusion and a subjective experience that we are involved in because of our own limitations and ignorance, like Victoria said. So we're trying to make aspirations uh, for the benefit of all beings, because all beings as one is our true nature. We're not just sitting for ourselves to feel better, or that might be a byproduct of it, but setting intentions and making aspirations really is about tuning into the view of Buddhism. That's what I was talking about, setting intentions.
Yeah.
As far as coping with grief, if you want to add something about that.
The most important thing, of course, I forgot to mention is then, so when we do have suffering, when we have loss, we have grief, we have pain that we are experiencing for ourselves, our loved one has cancer, we're experiencing it for them, etc. We lose a child or a parent. What do we do? How do we take that pain and transform it into a path? And actually, the answer to that is very, very simple. What we do with our grief is that we use that energy. Let's say we acknowledge right now my energy, my breath, my life force is all permeated by grief. What do we do? How do we transform it? And that's not to say that we want to transform it into a state of giddiness or anything like this. What we want to do is make it meaningful. So how do we do it? How do we make it practice? We simply connect to the grief of all the others. Because if I have cancer and I have sadness right now, when I think of countless others, and not just humans, that are going through exactly the same state, suddenly my grief is a drop in the ocean. And when I can use my own pain to do practice for others, I don't waste my energy, I don't waste my pain, I don't waste my condition. Suddenly I make this pain and grief and this, isolation that I'm feeling, let's say in my own body, if I'm experiencing a tremendous illness right now, I use that energy to pray for all the others in a very same situation. And that's when I was saying, like, when we are when we're not any longer engaged in that ignorant dualistic mind of self-attachment, just me, just I am suffering and I'm all alone. Actually, when the eye of wisdom shines out into the universe and sees all the others who are suffering from the same thing right now, the sky becomes lit, the darkness becomes like lit up, because all these other little points of light who are like me just shining out there into this vastness. Altogether, we become like a sky illuminated by the sun, because so many of us are bearing the same thing. So that is how we make something that could crush us and destroy us into something that's very, very precious and meaningful, is that we take our own grief, whether it's loss or sickness, or we're at the brink of death, etc., and we think on all the others and connect with them, and we use our energy, we use that grief like the fuel for practice, and we pray for all the beings, and that includes ourselves. So that's how we connect, you know, we connect through the eye of wisdom. We connect to light. We go from dark of selfishness to light of seeing all the other little sparks out there who are dealing with the same thing. And we can do Tonglen, or we can simply recite the four immeasurables, or we can simply sit with this and understand and just connect to the painfulness of countless others. And then suddenly we are not alone. And, we have this collective energy to deal with this. And our suffering becomes tremendously diminished when we think on the suffering of others, because no matter how we are suffering, there is someone out there suffering way more intensely than us. You know, we always have to understand that no matter how much we suffer right now, someone with a greater capacity is bearing a bigger burden. And, you know, we connect our grief, we put it into the pool of all the others, and the grief becomes transformed into practice and into light. And so that's how we bring suffering onto the path.
How long have you been using meditation in both your lives? Oh, we were introduced to meditation 2007. As soon as the practice started, a band started to practice next door to me. This hardly ever happened, so the timing felt funny. Is there any special way to deal with what feels like extreme distractions? I mean, it's really applying the same techniques, you know what I mean? It's like you become aware that you're distracted, you become aware that this noise is bothering you, you know, you become aware that it makes you angry even or something if it happens a lot. And then you apply that technique and go back to the breath and go, you know, with that technique of the cloud dissolving and kind of um, settling back into that open space. Almost you're trying to relate to that sound as something that has no inherent substance or reality to it, like basically everything material, you know. Um, Not saying that it's easy. Things like that can be very distracting depending on how we perceive them and our own, you know, some people that may not bother at all. Some people may really like that kind of thing, and some people are not distracted, but everybody's different, you know. Sometimes a certain type of music can push a button, or you know who the people are, and their behaviors always annoy you because they're selfish or inconsiderate, or whatever it is. So it's, um, you really have to see what works. But there's definitely ways to just apply almost the same thing, because what you're dealing with is not them as much as your response to it. You know what I mean? I mean, if I hear like somebody doing that outside and then, you know, there's somebody blowing the horn, you know, it's my response to that because I immediately have a picture of this type of person and I get angry at that person for being, you know, not caring about others. But it's really like that's my story that I invent. But if you apply the same techniques during your session, you can certainly work with distractions. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, just what you said. First, you think on, as with any senses, you know, our, you know, five perceptions, sensory perceptions, you think on the empty quality of the sound. Listen to it and just let it kind of just, you know, dissipate into the world. You can transform it and think of it as mantra or something else. But the more important point that Michael made is you have to, outside of the object of the mind and the senses, you have to look at how the mind, you are holding that perception. uh, More important is not to dissolve the sound, but to dissolve your attachment to the sound. And in that moment when you're holding it with impatience or, you know, frustration or maybe even a little bit of anger, that's what needs to be really looked at and dissolved. And actually, the moment our awareness kind of looks at itself, looks at our own emotions, they start to dissipate. You have to look at our mental states very, very directly. Don't worry so much about the object of the mind, but the mind itself, how it's holding that object, the energy behind the hand that holds the object. Is that hand like irritated, impatient? It desires it to be something else. It's not easy. It's absolutely not easy to deal with distractions. You know, it's when the mind is not stable and, you know, hasn't trained. But training can only occur when we're dealing with obstacles. When we're sitting and everything is smooth and great and we're on the beach with a cocktail, it's difficult to meditate because there's not much to meditate on when everything is pacified. Meditation really has to take place, practice has to take place when we're dealing with difficult things. That's what practice is for. So, you think of it, oh, it's an opportunity for me to see my mind being kind of hooked and transformed into these difficult mental states by an exterior thing. And then you work on that. It's not so much the object, it's really the mind and the way the mind holds the object that we have to work on. And so difficult situations are opportunities.
There's several questions that are pretty much like this, you know, talking about like distractions and, difficult situations, and having a practice and committing to a regular practice of meditation, working with kind of awareness and mindfulness in this way, really can help those situations. What we're kind of teaching is not like, what to do in this situation. Well, it's hard to say. It's similar to like martial arts training or something like that. Martial arts training is not really about learning, what to do in this situation. It's about kind of training your instincts. So your instincts and your body is trained to move and react in a certain way through these certain techniques. It's kind of a similar thing because, we can tell you don't get angry if someone does this, or, try to, see them as this or that. But it's really through the practice that you're able to engage and you're able to deal with it in a way that you maybe haven't before. Now, it's not really about quick fix, pop psychology, which a lot of times Buddhism gets watered down into. And there's no shortcut for doing the work. You know what I mean? It's not just about theoretical stuff and just, be in the moment. Well, how do you be in the moment? You be in the moment by, sitting and practicing being in the moment every day, as a daily practice. It's not enough just to read it in a book and saying be in the moment and be here now and you'll be more present. Well, how do you do that? It's fine to hear it and have somebody say it, but to practice it, and where it becomes, like Victoria said, the practice is so you can bring it into your life and you interact with your life and the elements of the outer world in a different way with different tools. So there's several questions that have the same thing, and I'm not going to kind of read them all because we can all apply the same thing here.
As I said before, the teachings say that mind is happiness and mind is suffering. Suffering has a lot to do with our afflictive emotions, right? I hate this, I want this, I'm jealous of this. These are sufferings, not objects in the world, are reactions, the quality of our mind. When the mind is angry, it holds everything like a fist, and holding it like a fist and this tension is what is perceived by us as suffering. Same thing with the other afflictions, with jealousy and pride. When you're comparing yourself to someone else, wow, I want to be better, or I am. Those are all painful mental states, and that's what practice is knowing and being able to influence directly the quality of our mind. Something is bothering me, I notice it. My breath starts to shift a little bit, I can feel its energy changing. Well, I notice it, and I become aware of it, and I say to myself, okay. By simply shedding light on it, I can open that clenched fist. I can say to myself, I'm not suffering the thing, the object. I am suffering my anger, my way of holding that object. That's the sphere of practice. We're not there to take out every thorn of the earth. We are there to put the sandals on and walk over the whole globe of thorns or broken glass. That's what we do. We guard the mind. It's all about the mind, because it's the mind that holds the objects, that perceives the objects. We have to get away from that kind of naive notion: things happen to me, things are bad out there, they make me feel like this. That's just baby talk. We allow ourselves to become angry or respond to things and hold things through anger. We allow ourselves to hold things through pride and measure in certain ways and be pretentious and live in these difficult comparisons. My neighbor has a bigger house, and I need why don't I have that? Those are all the ways of suffering that we can shed, that is within our power, because those are all mental states, and mental states are us. We don't depend on anything or anyone for our mind. We can change our mind, we can hold our mind, we can influence the way we perceive things. That's what training really is.
How do you know when you can, should stop, or when you are done? I think in the beginning, it's good to just set short, sessions that you can do very regularly, every day, several times a week, and you can use a timer if you want, you could set it for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 15 or 5 or whatever it is. Or you can just sit, and do it for how long you feel. I mean, there's no should. You're asking when you can, should. There's no should, and there's no done, really. You know what I mean? It's ideally, you start to use this mindfulness and awareness all the time. That's what a Buddha, Buddha's in the nature of mind all the time, experiencing the view, realizing the view and living in that, in that space of that, and in mindfulness. So there's no, as far as the session, the actual session, formal session of practice of meditation, that's up to you. There's no real should. Again, there's a lot of questions that asked about difficulties in certain situations, and I think we've kind of covered that.
Just expand them to incorporate others in the same situation. That really brings your difficulty and transforms it into something else. It makes it from simply a subjective experience of a difficulty into a practice, which is opening up yourself and really tapping into the nature of mind. When we can start to switch from the me mind to the mind of all beings, is really truly when suffering diminishes to an incredible extent, and we use the energy of that suffering meaningfully instead of just wallowing in it and feeling like the walls are closing in on us. When you look into your mind, ask yourself, do I just see this darkness and I feel all alone? Is my mind just a blackness, a void, or is my mind illuminated? Am I aware of the space and of all the others? Do I understand reality, the reality of my suffering, the reality of the situation for all sentient beings, those who are suffering very similar kinds of things that I am suffering right now? Use that energy to become aware rather than shut down and get a tighter lid. The tighter the lid, the tighter the fist, the greater the suffering. You want that suffering to diminish, start to think on others. And then it becomes meaningful and it becomes practice. And then, because in that moment you're experiencing the spaciousness of the mind, and you are directing your mind's energy away from me, to let me be with all those others and let me take some of their burdens onto myself. As long as I'm suffering, why not take their burden onto myself? Why can't I share my energy with others who are suffering the same things like myself right now? Make it meaningful.
Every time I meditate, it's kind of uncomfortable because of the tension that gets to my back. But I have to admit that the posture helps me to relax. Is there an explanation on why the posture is essential?
Yes.
Yeah, especially it's really the the subtle energetic channels in the body when they're in that posture, they're aligned and they allow for the the settling of the mind, because the mind rides on the, like they Victoria read, or I read that she gave us, on the breath, on the winds, and the winds are kind of regulated by those channels. Actually, we do the 9 purifying breaths and work with clearing those channels, and we don't have time to get into it right now because we're almost out of time, but next week we'll do the 9 purifying breaths. But that's probably why you're feeling able to relax through that.
Think on your central channel, which does not really terminate. It goes through your entire body, from your crown to your secret chakra, and the wisdom energy flows through that central channel. So think on that. And the more you can really kind of move away from awareness of the body to the awareness of the wind, of the breath, more subtle awareness of this, more toward your subtle body, toward your energetic portion of you, the more your body will relax. And ultimately, it's also just a habit. Eventually, people start without being able to do even a half lotus or anything, and then eventually, with time, you'll be able to relax into all those things. It really starts to happen when you shift from the awareness of the physical vessel more into the awareness of awareness and of your energy.
Does your practice have a name? I mean, this kind of meditation they call shamatha, calm abiding meditation, really. Okay, before we wrap up, we, as we do in every class, and if any of this really is of interest to you, especially um, the meditation technique we're teaching is really kind of a secular, it's really, it's not solely, Buddhist, but the other ideas and the other concepts and things that we read from the book, and what Victoria was talking about, Buddhist concepts, if those things are of interest to you, the best thing to do is to connect with a teacher from an authentic lineage. We're students who are sharing our experience, and words of teachers that we've, connected with, either, directly or indirectly. But we encourage you to make those connections. There's a wealth of teachings online on YouTube and on various websites for the teachers. We have a list of teachers on the Solidago Productions website, which you use to sign in or register, and a selection of books from some of these teachers. But really, that's the way to learn and to connect to these practices in the most, authentic and most effective, really, way. Um, And that's really, really, really important. We can't really stress that enough. This is a living wisdom tradition that goes back from teacher to student for 2,500 years, and it's still in the world and accessible and alive. Although very rare and precious, but it is here, and actually not that difficult to connect to. So we encourage that. Really, really, really important. And the last part of our class, what we do is dedicate the merit, whatever good, has come through this, any virtue, aspects of virtue that have arisen through this time that we've gathered together, for something positive. We dedicate that merit for the benefit of all beings, and we do it by saying, by this merit, may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Thank you for joining us. And we want to thank our producer, Nick Solidio, who, through his kindness and generosity, we're able to do this class. We'll see you. We try to do these every week, every Sunday, There's been a lot of gaps in the last few weeks for a number of reasons, but hopefully we'll be back next week. I post on my Instagram uh, the announcement usually the day before, sometimes 2 days before, and then you can go to the link in the bio and register. Okay, see you soon.